I'm going to show you a lot of cool tricks that you can do with managing large sets of data. That's one of the fortes of Excel. And so in this screencast, I'm going to show you how to apply a filter. The first example is in a file called roster. I've got a bunch of hypothetical student names here. Their hypothetical student ID and their hypothetical section. And maybe we wanted to just separate this into the various sections, so we want to filter by section. We don't necessarily want to sort, which I'll show you in a subsequent screencast. We just kind of want to pluck out section 101, 102, and so on. So I can go up here if I am on the Home tab. You can either go over here to Sort and Filter and apply the filter there, or you can go up to the Data tab and you've got Filter here. As long as my active cell is somewhere within that contiguous block of cells, I can do Filter. This will actually apply a filter to all of them. These filters are denoted by these little drop-down lists at the top. For example, I can go up here to the section filter and I can click on that, and maybe I just wanted to select the section 101 students. Then what I can do is I can deselect and then I can select the 101, and then I can click OK, and you see that it has filtered. Over here on the left, you see that it's hiding a lot of the rows. The nice thing about this is maybe I want to prepare a section spreadsheet file. I got another example here. It's called batches in this file. Now we have batch ID, production date, and the ship date. Maybe for whatever reason, maybe our boss wanted us to put together a list of all the batch IDs between two different production dates. So I can go up here to Data. I'm going to add a filter, and now you can drop down this filter, and here you can select the dates, but maybe I want to do a more specific filter. So if you click on Date, you hover over date filters, it brings up all these different options. We're just going to do between. I'm just going to show you one example. So we have a production date is after or equal to, so maybe we do between May 1st. So I can kind of use this calendar thing. May 1st of 2019. Click on that. So between May 1st and December 31st. So I can then click on OK, and it's going to filter for batch IDs between those two production dates. And then if you wanted to, you can just copy all these, put them in a separate spreadsheet, save that file, and send it off to your boss. We can go ahead and remove that filter, just clear filter there. Get us back to our original data. Maybe we wanted to just filter out the batch IDs that started with a C or an F. So I can go up here to the batch ID filter. I'm going to do text filters, begins with. So maybe we wanted to screen for those that begin with C, or maybe begin. We can scroll down here to begins with an F. So maybe for whatever reason those batches are important, we want to know more information about them, we can filter those, and then we have more information on the production date and the ship date. So maybe you want to figure out who received those batches. Maybe they're bad batches and you need to recall them. So I'm going to go ahead and clear those filters. There's also one for maybe it ends. So ends with, maybe ends with an N is important for whatever reason, and so we filter out the bad batch IDs that end with an N. Let's go ahead and remove that filter. Clear filters. Maybe it's the end of the year and we wanted to reward those people who were in charge of shipping within 5 days of the production date. So we want to reward those types of people. I could put in a column here for ship time, and we can subtract from the ship date the production date. Make sure that this is general or number, and then I can double click this down, and I'm going to add a filter. So we haven't added a filter here, so you actually have to go back to data, deselect the filter, and then reselect it, and then add the filter. By the way, if you just want to add a filter to a single column, you can we can do Control Shift down and add the filter there. Either way, it doesn't matter, or you can add the filter to all the columns of your data. So maybe you want to filter ship time. You can either select here 2, 3, 4, so 5 days or fewer. Those are the ones that satisfy that constraint. Or you can always do number filters, and you can do less than or equal to, and you can put in a 5. I'm going to show you here how we can create something known as a table, an Excel table. These are extremely useful when you're working with large data sets. I'm working once again with this file called cookies that we used a lot in the past. So I've got the seller, the buyer, the cookies that they ordered, the boxes, the quantity of boxes, and the price. And we worked a lot with this. We did a lot of different things on this data set. Now I'm going to show you how we can convert this into something known as an Excel table. We can do this a couple ways. The easiest way is to go up here to the Home tab, and you can format as table. This will allow you to specify the preference, the table format that you like, and I like to use this green over here. Another way to do this is you can go to Insert Table right here. That does not allow you to specify the format of your table, the color. And then finally you can do Control T to make it into a table. So I'm going to go up here to the Home tab, Format as Table. Let's make it into this nice green. It asks you to select where is the data for your table. And if you just have a single cell selected in a contiguous block of cells, it's going to sort of detect that area. And then make sure if you have headers that you have this clicked. And then you can go ahead and press OK. So this is our table. It's grouped together as one individual object, more or less. So I can go up here and rename this. I'm going to rename this just cookies. So you can rename the name of that table if you'd like. Then if you type into the name box cookies, it's going to select that data. So it's very similar to naming an array. The difference is that you can add very easily. You can add rows to this table. So if I do tab, you see that it has added an entire row. And if I go to the end of that next row and I press tab again, it's going to add in another row. So let me go ahead and just do Control Z a couple times. I did show you in a screencast how you can do this using the name manager. You can make a named array adapt in a dynamic fashion when you add different rows, but converting it to an Excel table really simplifies things. Another nice feature of these Excel tables, if you go up here to Table Design, there's a couple different options here. one thing I like to do is add in a total row, and so it adds in this row. That's a different row than all of the entries. So if I'm on the end of the last row here and I press tab, it still adds a row before that total row. But you can select what you want to display, maybe the price. We don't really need a total for the price, so I'm going to select none. But maybe we want a total quantity, so you can sum. There's all sorts of different things that you can play around with, but I'm just going to put in a sum so we can kind of show that we have sold 46 boxes. Another really nice thing about these tables is if I add a sales column, you see when I press enter, it automatically added that column to the table. So if I go back into the name box and I type in cookies, it's referring to that entire contiguous block of cells. When you're working in these tables, it's easy to perform calculations. You also notice that when I click on cell D2, it's got this different look to that variable that you haven't seen before. These are known as structured references. So that's referring to that entire column. So I can multiply that by the price. And because tables, you're oftentimes doing column-wise stuff, by default, it's going to copy that formula all the way down. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and format all of this to currency. I showed you this in some previous screencasts. Last thing related to these tables, if you decide that you don't want it to be formatted as an Excel table anymore, you can always just click somewhere in your table, go up to Table Design, and do Convert to Range. And it'll ask you to confirm, and then you've got this back as just a typical range. If you want to remove the formatting, you would have to do so. So we can go up here to Cell Styles and Normal. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about using tables in Excel. Whenever you are working with large data sets, you will inevitably have to search for duplicates and possibly remove duplicates. So in this screencast, I'm going to go over how you can identify duplicates and how you can remove them. So I've got this file called duplicates. I'm going to start with kind of an easy example here. I've just got a bunch of animals here, and we want to check to see if there are duplicates. If there are duplicates, we would like to remove them. If you just want to check to see if there are duplicates in a set of data, you can highlight that. You can use conditional formatting. So I'm selecting this block of cells, go up here to conditional formatting. We go to highlight cell rules, and then you can just select duplicate values. You can duplicates here, but I could search for unique values. So it's kind of the converse of one another. But I'm going to go ahead and identify the duplicates. So then you would know that these highlighted cells are duplicates, and you might go through and delete them. So let's go ahead and do Control Z to get back to our original data. If you wanted Excel to automatically remove the duplicates in this list, you could go here and we can highlight that, and I can go up here in the Data tab, Remove Duplicates. There's this little tool here called Remove Duplicates, so I can click on that Command button, and it brings up this Remove Duplicates tool. I only have one column of data. I'll show you here in a minute where we might have multiple columns of data. So really, if I want to remove duplicates here, all I do is make sure that column B is selected, and then I can click OK. And it says 3 duplicate values were found and removed, 11 unique values remain. That's how I can permanently remove the duplicates. it's always a good idea to go back and just make a copy. So you could just copy this entire sheet and paste onto a new sheet, just in case you remove something and later on you realize that it was an error. The second sheet down here in this file, I've just got a bunch of numbers here. Again, if I wanted to just identify duplicates, I could go to Home, Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cell Rules, Duplicate Values, and it's going to identify duplicate values. Alternatively, I can identify unique values. So let's just, I'm just going to cancel. Now I cannot use data remove duplicates because remove duplicates it searches through columns. So it deletes duplicate rows from a sheet. So unfortunately I cannot remove duplicates this way. If you did have duplicates in a chunk of information here, you would just have to, the easiest way is just to identify those duplicates using conditional formatting and then go through and manually remove them. I've got another example here. Maybe we have orders by various people. We have their names, their categories, and catalog numbers. And we wanted to check for duplicates. Now you notice we have a couple of opportunities for duplicates. We could have duplicate names, of which we have several. We can have duplicate categories here, and we can potentially have duplicate catalog numbers. So I'm going to go up here. You don't have to have the entire array selected. I can go up here to remove duplicates, and it's going to, by default, select that. If you have data headers, Excel does a good job of detecting those. Otherwise, you could remove that, but I do have data headers. And you can check down here what you would like Excel to search through in order to look for duplicates. If you have all three selected, that means it's going to be all three have to be an exact match in order for it to be a duplicate. You see here in my data I have Heather backpacks. I have that 3 times. The first two, though, are unique. We have this catalog number here and a different catalog number there. So if I remove duplicates with all 3 columns selected, it's not going to detect the first and 5th rows as being duplicates because all 3 of them are not the same. But what it will do is the 5th row and the second to last row, those are exactly identical. So I click OK, and it said we found 1 duplicate removed, 11 unique values remain. So let me actually go back, Control Z, and I'm going to show you now what happens if we do remove duplicates, but we deselect one of these. So let's deselect the catalog number. So now all it's going to do is you have to have exact matches for name and category, but not catalog number. In this case, all of them are unique except for Heather's backpack orders. So when I click OK, it's going to remove those 2 repeats of Heather backpacks, and it says here 2 duplicate values were found. I'm going to go ahead and do Control Z to get us back to the original data. So now let's see what happens if I just filter by name. And you see that there are lots of these that have duplicate names in the name column. So when I do that, we remove all 6. Control Z. We can also look for just the category. So maybe there can only be one of those categories, and I can do that. Excel go through a chunk of data to remove duplicates. And again, it's always a good idea to copy the original data set and store that on a different sheet. You can do Control-Z, but sometimes you've messed up your spreadsheet so much that it's really unfeasible to go back, and it's always good to have the original data. One more thing, you can always convert this into a table. So I can go up here to Format as Table, and up here in the left on Table Design, there's a Remove Duplicates, and that brings up the same exact tool that we used with just the information that I had before I converted it to a table. So hopefully, I've got this file called Timesheets available for you to work with. On the Initial tab, that's what we're going to start with. I've also got this All Data tab, so we're going to actually copy the data here in a moment. Let's just start with a single entry, and we're going to want to make this into an Excel table. I would highly recommend when you're making Excel tables to just start with the first row and then format it how you want. Then, when you add in more rows to this data table, it automatically formats the rest of the table. So I've got the date here, an employee, the rate. Now I'm going to first set it up for data validation. Data validation will only accept a certain range that you specify or a certain condition for these inputs. So let's click on the date. Data validation is found up here in Data. There's this little data validation tool, so we can click on that. Now what we want to do, this is a date. So my validation criteria is going to be a date. In here I'm going to have a between condition, so you could change that if you want. The start date, I'm just going to refer to the begin date of our period. Really important that you make that an absolute reference by adding the dollar signs and using F4 key to make that absolute. The end date, I'm also going to click up here and make that absolute by pressing F4 or manually adding the dollar signs. Then I can go ahead and click OK. What happens now is if somebody tries to put in something that's not in that range, it gives an error, as I showed earlier in the preview. The employees here, we want to perform input validation here for the employees, so we're going to make a drop-down list. Let's go up here to Data Validation. Now you can allow lists. So if I click lists, you can either type in names here, so I can say Charlie, Max, and so on, or if you've got this in a list like I do already, then I'm just going to go here and I'm going to select that. There it added the dollar signs automatically, which is good. So that's going to allow us only to select an employee in that list. I go ahead and click OK, and now you notice that there's this little drop-down menu, and I can select whoever I want, but it's constrained or restricted to the employees that we have here. This just ensures that somebody doesn't put in somebody in the employee box that is not a current employee. Now the rate. I've got this little table over here. This is sort of our lookup table, our schedule for the different employees and their rates. So Perry, Harry, Terry, Mary, Jerry, Barry, Gary, and Larry. So we want to be able to look up, based upon the employee that's next to it, what their rate is. We can put in the VLOOKUP function. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and name this data set. I'm just going to name that rates up here in the name box. Then we can use the VLOOKUP function. We can look up the value next to it. The table array that I'm looking through is rates. The column index that I want to output is actually the second column of this table, which is 2. And I always put a false there if you need for it to be an exact match. I can go ahead and press enter. So what it's doing is it's looking through here for the employee and it's spitting out the rate. And it changes based upon who I select. I'm going to go ahead and make that accounting to $21. The overtime box here, I'm going to also add data validation. So let's go data validation. And this I want to constrain. This is also going to be a drop-down list. And I just want this to be either double dash or yes. The double dash will basically make it blank. and that's going to be our default. The default always comes first here. Let's go ahead and click OK. And so now the user can select yes, or they can select that dash dash, which just makes it blank. You could put in an N there if you wanted to, but I like to keep it nice and clean and blank if there's no overtime. The pay calculation is going to be an if statement. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if there's overtime. If the overtime box, the cell next to it, is equal to yes, then what we're going to do is we're going to take 1.5, so we're doing 50% extra pay. So maybe for holidays or weekends, 1.5 times the rate times the number of hours. If it's false, we just want to do 100% of the rate, which is just the rate times the hours. So that's going to be a little selection strategy based upon whether or not one has selected overtime in the cell right next to it. For example, if I change this to a yes, then it automatically recalculates to be 150% of the regular pay. So now that we've got this all set up, we've formatted everything nicely, including the data validation. So I'm going to highlight this, I'm going to go to the Home tab, and I'm going to do Format as Table, and I'd like to use this green one, and now I've got my table. Now the nice thing about the table is you can add rows. So I can press the Tab key when I'm on the last cell of that row, and it'll add an entire new row. The nice thing about tables also is we can take other data. So here I've got a lot more data, so I'm just going to select Mary down because I've already got Carrie there. Control copy, and I can go ahead and paste here. Now the nice thing about this is I can take the data here and I can just merge right into that table, and it automatically recalculates, reformats, so it added the dollar.
There are many situations in which you have a large set of data in a spreadsheet in Excel, and you need to use lookup functions to try to find matching data within the larger set of data. So I'm going to show you how to use one-way lookup functions in this screencast. This is what we are going to be creating in this screencast. We've got some students here with their name, we have the student ID number, we have their homework 1 assignment score, homework 2 exam 1 score. Now you can imagine that this spreadsheet might be pretty big. We might have a lot of students or records here in rows, and then we've got a lot of different headings here in columns. And so this might actually be pretty big, and it's nice to sort of have a lookup area over here where you kind of summarize things. The user can type in the name of the student here in cell H3, and it'll automatically spit out the student ID number, the homework 1 assignment, homework 2 assignment score, and the exam 1 score. And then the student lookup, we're going to start from here, and we're going to create that student lookup. The first thing I'm going to do is I want to convert this range A1 through E8 to an Excel tables. I just need to make sure that I have clicked somewhere in that table. I'm going to go up to the Home tab, and over here, Format as Table. And I'm just going to choose this nice green one, as I always do. And then we can click OK, and it converts it to an Excel table. The first thing I'm going to do is rename this. I'm just going to rename this data up here in the table name area. Press Enter, and we are ready to go. Now there is a VLOOKUP function in Excel for vertical lookup. This is, from what I've heard, the third most popular function in Excel. The VLOOKUP function has 3 required arguments and 1 optional argument. The first argument in the VLOOKUP function is what you are searching for. In this case, I'm looking for Jennifer, so that's going to be my lookup value. And I'm going to go ahead and make that absolute, because later on I'm going to drag this down through through the different rows here. The second argument is the table array that we are looking up. And I named our table over here, I renamed it data. So that's what I'm looking through. Now, this is really important. The VLOOKUP function is always looking for the lookup value in the leftmost column of the second argument, which is, in this case, data. So it's always looking through the leftmost column. The third argument is the column index number that we want output. In this cell, H4, we want to output the student ID. That's actually the second column of my data over here. So I'm going to put a 2 in there. And finally, the last argument is optional, but if you want an exact match, you need to put in false. If you only require an approximate match, you can put in true. But for what I usually do, I'm putting in I want an exact match, so I put in false. And then I can press enter. And it has gone through, it's looked for Jennifer in the leftmost column of our data array, and then it's output the second column of the data array, which in this case is that student ID number. Now the nice thing about this is I can change the name here and it automatically updates. So it's a live solution. So let's go ahead and put it back to Jennifer. Now because I made the first argument of that VLOOKUP function an absolute reference, I can pull this down and I'm just going to modify each of these. The only difference now, I'm not looking up the student ID number in row 5, but instead I'm looking up the homework 1 score, which is column 3 of the data. So I'm just going to replace this with 3, press enter, and that's looking up Jennifer's homework 1 score. I'm going to double click in H6 and I'm going to put a 4 here, and I'm going to do the same thing for exam 1. This is going to be our 5th column of our data array, and I can press enter. And again, if I change this to somebody else on the table, then it's going to output the corresponding grades. Now the nice thing about this is if you put the name of somebody not on here, because I put that exact match, in other words, the last argument here on the VLOOKUP function is false, that means it requires an exact match. Now let's create a second area here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do control copy and I'm going to do control paste here. We might want to create a reverse lookup where now we have student ID number and we have the name. And so I'm going to actually delete all this and the student ID number. Let's just take Charlie's, control copy, and we're going to put that here. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to look through the table here for student ID number, and then it's going to provide the name, and then it's going to provide the assignment scores. Now you cannot do this easily with VLOOKUP. Remember, VLOOKUP will always look through the leftmost column of the second argument. For student ID number, there's no way I can output a column that's on the left of student ID because it's looking up student ID number in column B, and the names are left of that. Instead of using VLOOKUP, you can use these two functions known as match and index. So first let me show you how the match function works, and I'm just going to put it in this cell here. If I type in match, we can look up a value. So I'm going to look up student ID. The second argument is a lookup array. So I'm searching for student ID number in this array there. And you see we have that structured reference there because it's a table. The third argument, it's really important, again, if you're trying to get an exact match, to type in a 0 here. For the match function, 0 means exact match. And I'm going to press enter. What this means is that it's finding 276544776, that student ID number, in row 3 of that array that I put in as the second argument. Now, if we take that, we can use the index function. So if I know that the student ID number is in the third row down, then I can use the index function. The first argument of the index function is the array that you want output. And again, that's our name column from our data array. That's a structured reference. And then I can use that row number that I calculated using the match function, and I can just put that in as the second argument, and then it's outputting Charlie. So what I'm going to do is in this name box, I'm going to join both of these into one single formula. This formula in E11 is using the formula in E10. So I'm just going to go in here, I'm going to copy that, press enter, and inside Charlie, instead of E10, I'm going to put that match function. So I don't even really need E10 anymore. Now I can take this, I can do control cut, and go up here to H10, and I can paste that in there. So now it's automatically updating. If I take one of these other student ID numbers, so maybe Chester's, control copy, I paste it in here, it automatically updates. And now I can do the same thing. Instead of name, I can do it with homework, homework 2, and exam 1. By the way, you could also do these with VLOOKUP, but let me show you how we can do this with match. The lookup value is the student ID number. I'm going to make that an absolute reference. Lookup array, I'm looking again through student ID, and I want an exact match, so I put a 0. This is for Chester, so this will be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this will return 6, but then inside that, we need to use the index. The array that we want to use for homework 1 is this vector. So I can press comma, just put a parentheses at the very end of this, and I press enter, and it's saying that Chester's score on homework 1 was a 7. I can drag this down, but I need to modify a few things. For homework 2, instead of the homework 1 column of our data table, I can just modify this to be homework 2. I can press enter, and here, instead of homework 1, this is just going to be exam 1, and there we have it. So now we can change the student ID. Let's go ahead and copy Rodney's just to make sure this is working. So that it's looking up the name of that student, the homework 1 score of a 9, homework 2 score of 6, and exam 1 score of 87. So there's two ways to do lookups. You can use the VLOOKUP if you are looking up something that's in the leftmost column of table, or if it's something in the middle and you're trying to look for something on the left of that column, you can